Laughter bounced off the marble walls before I even reached the glass doors. It wasn't loud, just confident enough to sting. My sister stood there, relaxed, amused, talking about me like I was already an afterthought. Someone repeated her words. Someone else smiled. No one looked my way. I stopped a few steps back. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I watched how easily she owned the room, how carelessly she dismissed me. She believed the meeting was already decided. That belief made her sloppy. Before I tell you how this turned out, let me pause for a second. If this story feels familiar, tap like. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I notice patterns in those places. Have you ever stayed quiet while someone else assumed you had nothing? My name is Emma, I'm in my late 20s. And for most of my life, people like my sister have mistaken my silence for surrender. I arrived early on purpose. Papers organized. Phone charged. Mind clear. When you're treated like you don't belong, preparation becomes a kind of armor. I'd learned that reacting only feeds people who enjoy watching you shrink. This inheritance meeting wasn't sudden. The tension had been building for years, quietly, behind polite conversations and forced smiles. I was never invited into the planning. I was informed, late, briefly, without details. My sister, on the other hand, acted like the outcome was already hers. She spoke to everyone as if she were hosting the meeting, not attending it. She laughed easily. She made promises that weren't hers to make. I stayed invisible. That was the role she expected me to play. On the way there, something happened she didn't know about. Something small. Something ordinary. The kind of moment people forget the second it passes. I was crossing the street when I saw the wheelchair stuck at the curb. The man sitting in it didn't ask for help. He just waited, hands folded, eyes calm, like patience was something he'd practiced for a long time. I offered to help. He thanked me once. No drama. No gratitude speech. Just quiet relief as we moved forward together. We talked while we walked. About nothing important. About weather. About timing. When he asked where I was headed, I told him the truth. The inheritance meeting. He paused, then asked a simple question. If I minded company. By the time we reached the building, he was beside me. And inside, just beyond the glass doors, my sister was still smiling, completely unaware of what she was about to see. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature of the room shifted. Conversation slowed. Shoes paused mid-step. People noticed the wheelchair before they noticed me, and then they noticed who was walking beside it. My sister saw us last. Her smile froze, not dramatically, just enough to betray her. Color drained from her face in a way makeup couldn't hide. For half a second, she forgot to breathe. Then she laughed, too quickly, like she was trying to cover a misstep she didn't understand yet. I felt it then. That small, sharp change in the air. The moment when confidence cracks but hasn't fallen apart. She straightened her shoulders and recovered fast. She always did. She walked toward us like nothing was wrong, eyes sliding past me and locking onto the man beside me. Not curiosity. Recognition. Are you lost? She asked him, voice light, polite, controlled. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, calmly, like he had time she didn't. I'm right where I'm supposed to be, he said. That was when her jaw tightened. I kept my hand on the wheelchair handle, steady. I hadn't planned to arrive like this. I hadn't planned anything involving him at all. But I wasn't surprised either. Some people enter your life quietly because they're meant to be noticed later. My sister turned to me then, finally. Her eyes narrowed, searching my face for panic, confusion, apology, anything she could use. I gave her none of it. You didn't mention a guest, she said. I didn't know I needed permission, I replied. Around us, people pretended not to listen. They always do when tension makes them uncomfortable. But discomfort draws attention whether they want it to or not. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. This isn't the place for games. I smiled, just slightly. Then it's a good thing I'm not playing. The man shifted in his seat, adjusting his coat with slow precision. He looked fragile if you weren't paying attention. But I had been paying attention all morning. His hands were steady. His eyes were sharp. Someone from the legal team cleared their throat and announced the meeting would begin shortly. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. The room reorganized itself around authority. My sister took her seat at the head of the table, confident again, or pretending to be. She placed her phone face down, folded her hands, and avoided looking at us. I helped the man into position near the side of the table. No one stopped us. No one questioned it. Sometimes confidence doesn't need explanation, it just needs space. As I sat down beside him, I noticed something else. A few people weren't looking at my sister anymore. They were watching him. And for the first time that morning, I felt certain of one thing. Whatever she thought she knew about today, she was wrong. The meeting began the way these things always do, slow, formal, wrapped in language meant to sound fair. The attorney at the head of the table spoke about procedures, about intentions, about honoring wishes. My sister nodded along, calm and composed, like this was all a formality she was politely allowing. I stayed quiet. I always did better when I listened. She interrupted often. Asked questions she already knew the answers to. Clarified points that didn't need clarification. Every word was a reminder that she believed control was already in her hands. What she didn't realize was that every interruption was being noted. The man beside me didn't speak at all. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to unsettle her. I could see it in the way her foot tapped beneath the table, in the way her eyes kept drifting back to him, searching for confirmation of something she didn't want to be true. Halfway through, she leaned back and smiled. I think we can all agree this doesn't need to take long. The attorney paused. Actually, there are a few items that require careful review. Her smile faltered. She glanced at me again, sharper this time. You seem very calm. I am, I said. She studied my face like it was a puzzle missing a piece. You shouldn't be. Around the table, people shifted. Someone cleared their throat again. Silence stretched longer than she liked. This was the moment she expected me to fold. To show uncertainty. To look small. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table. No announcement. No explanation. Just enough sound to be heard. The attorney noticed immediately. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at the label. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. Where did you get this? He asked. I was given it, I said. My sister laughed. It came out wrong. Too loud. Too forced. This is ridiculous. She doesn't have access to anything relevant. The man beside me finally spoke. She does, he said quietly. Every head turned. His voice wasn't weak. It wasn't loud either. It carried because it didn't need to prove itself. My sister stared at him now, openly. I don't think you understand what this meeting is about. He met her gaze without blinking. I understand it very well. Something in his tone made the room feel smaller. More focused. Like the walls had leaned in to listen. The attorney hesitated, then nodded once. We'll review this document. My sister's hand clenched around her pen. She was still smiling, but the smile no longer reached her eyes. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. For the first time, she wasn't running the meeting. And she knew it. Minutes passed. Every comment my sister made now sounded rehearsed, like she was performing under pressure. She tried to steer the discussion, to redirect attention, to show authority, but the room had shifted. People were listening differently. Eyes flicked toward the man beside me, toward the folder I had placed on the table, and back to her. She laughed again, nervously this time, attempting to mask the unease. I think we're overcomplicating things, she said, voice slightly sharper than usual. But no one agreed. No one echoed her words. Her confidence, once effortless, was cracking under quiet observation. I leaned back slightly, keeping my posture calm. I said nothing. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every misstep she made, every overstatement, every assumption she had about control, I catalogued. Every time she tried to dismiss me or the man beside me, it became part of a larger picture, a picture she didn't even know existed yet. She asked the attorney another question, this one more pointed, trying to regain footing. Are you sure this is admissible? The attorney looked at the folder, then at me, then at her. Yes. This is valid. All documentation checks out. Her face shifted subtly, the moment you realize something is slipping, but you're not ready to admit it. The edges of her composure were fraying. For everyone else, it looked like a tense meeting. For me, it felt like clarity. The rules she had been counting on no longer applied. She was operating on assumptions, and assumptions crumble fast when quiet patience meets preparation. She glanced at me again, trying to read something. Fear, hesitation, guilt, but there was nothing. I was steady, calm. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her papers. She wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to being outmaneuvered without realizing it. And then, for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, she faltered completely. A subtle shift in posture. A pause in speech. A quiet intake of breath. It was small. It was enough. She thought she had won. But in truth, the meeting had only just begun. After what felt like hours compressed into minutes, I let the room settle. My sister had recovered some of her composure, but the edges of her confidence were worn. She was smiling, but her eyes betrayed the panic she refused to admit. The man beside me leaned forward slightly, whispering just enough for me to hear. Patience. Timing matters more than speed. I nodded silently. That sentence, so simple, carried more weight than any argument she could make. She tried again, bringing up points she assumed would intimidate me. I think we should reconsider the allocation, she said. Her tone was measured, deliberate. She believed she had control. I smiled faintly and tapped the folder. Everything is already documented. Verified. Ready for review. Her brow furrowed. You don't understand the full context. I understand exactly what's relevant, I interrupted calmly. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just enough to be heard. Around the table, people shifted. They sensed the change. It wasn't dramatic, but authority had quietly shifted. She was no longer leading the room. She glanced at the man beside me. For the first time, I noticed the subtle respect in others' eyes when they looked at him. His presence alone disrupted assumptions. People weren't dismissing him. They were noticing. She attempted one last tactic, charm. She smiled wider, leaned forward. Surely we can agree this is minor? The attorney shuffled the documents, careful to avoid showing bias. But the folds of her argument, once crisp, now looked sloppy. Her words, rehearsed and confident moments ago, lacked power. I leaned back, hands folded. Silence became a weapon. Every person in the room was paying attention to me now, not her theatrics. I felt a thrill of quiet satisfaction, but I didn't let it show. My advantage was hidden, strategic, and growing. She thought she was winning. But patience and preparation had already set the board. She didn't notice the subtle signals, the attorney's glance, the shift in seating posture, the way the other relatives exchanged silent looks. She didn't notice that the game was no longer hers. And in the next moments, everything she assumed about control would begin to crumble. The room had grown still. Every eye subtly shifted toward me and the man beside me. My sister's smile, which had carried so much confidence earlier, was now tight, forced. She leaned forward, as if to reclaim attention, but no one followed. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. Each document inside was verified, signed, and undeniable. The attorney began reviewing them aloud, confirming their legitimacy. My sister's mouth moved, trying to argue, but the words faltered. Every objection she raised had already been addressed, already invalidated by careful preparation she had never anticipated. He spoke then, quietly, firmly. These records are legally binding. The allocations are final. The color drained from her face completely. Her eyes widened. She looked around the room, searching for support, for some ally, but the respect and attention had already shifted. She had counted on assumptions, charm, and haste. None of it worked here. I didn't need to say more. My calmness, my silence, my steady presence beside him, had already spoken louder than any words could. The room understood the truth before she could articulate her next move. She slumped slightly, realizing the reality. Not with shouting. Not with drama. Just the quiet, undeniable collapse of control. Every smirk, every confident gesture she had relied on, dissolved in the weight of preparation and intelligence. I stood. Slowly. No triumph in my expression, just clarity, composure. I nodded politely to the attorney and the gathered relatives, acknowledging the conclusion. My sister looked at me one last time. There was shock, disbelief, and a subtle trace of regret. She had underestimated patience, preparation, and quiet strategy. The man beside me gave a small, approving nod. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It didn't need to be. His presence, guidance, and timing had turned the tide completely. I gathered my bag. Checked my phone. Stepped toward the door. The room, the tension, the drama, it all felt lighter now. Control was restored, not through confrontation, but through intelligence, calm, and lawful strategy. As I walked away, I glanced at her one final time. She had learned the hard way that arrogance and carelessness, even when polished, can never overcome preparation, patience, and presence. And in that moment, I understood something quietly satisfying. Revenge doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need spectacle. It only requires precision, timing, and the calm knowledge that those who underestimate you will often defeat themselves. I left the building unchanged, untouched by the chaos she had tried to create. And for the first time, I felt completely in control, not because I had power over her, but because I had never lost it over myself. The inheritance, the meeting, the collapse, it wasn't just a victory. It was proof that strategy and patience beat assumptions every single time. And with that, I walked into the next chapter of my life, calm, composed, and quietly victorious.